Hi, it's George Stocker, and today I want to talk to you about the different ways that I've seen people split up microservices. Now, this is just general microservice architecture or topology, but it does play into event-driven architecture as well. And the three ways I've seen people split up microservices is as small as they can possibly get, for number one, and not so much as they possibly get, but as small as they want. And so what that means is that you might see uh, functions as a service, lambdas if you're working on Lambda, if you're working on AWS, or commonly referred to as lambdas, or as large as a giant monolithic application, um, and that's normal. Now there are uh, pluses and minuses to doing that, and we'll go into those. Um, but that's, typically just, hey, I heard about microservices. I want to split them up, and so I'll just split them up willy-nilly. The second way is using the principles from domain-driven design, particularly with bounded contexts. That's a fancy word, but it generally just means uh, words have a particular meaning, and inside of that meaning, um, it's all used the same way inside of a particular context. And we'll go into that in depth as well. And then the third way is functionally. Now, I also call this horizontally for reasons you'll see in a second, but it can actually be both horizontal by function, and there can be a little bit of verticality in there as well. But we'll talk about that. Now, there of course are other variations, but these are the three main ways that you would see them split up, even if people use all three ways in a particular microservices topology. So, way number one, from function as a service to as big as they want, this happens, or it can start to happen, usually when you have a monolith and you start breaking parts of it out. And what you start breaking out at first are the things that you have to call third-party APIs for. So to give an example, uh, if you have a function that has to, when a user is signing up for your service, they have to give you a phone number and you have to validate that phone number. Your choices are to, write that whole third-party logic or that whole logic to, send a text message to a phone number, get, and generate the number and make sure it matches and deal with all that. Or you could just use Twilio. Twilio provides APIs that allow you to basically send a text message to any phone number you want. And trying to build that infrastructure into your system would be nonsensical. So, easiest way to do it is to make an API call to Twilio and send text, right? And you tell it, hey, I want you to send a text to this number, and I want you to send them this following text message, where that is the number that I want to generate, that I want to validate for them. So this function really is, generate number or generate code, let's say, and then um, send, you know, text to 5551212, and then whatever v is the code. And that's all that function does. That's all that function needs to do. Now you might have another function that will maintain how many times someone's asked or anything like that. But in general, this can operate on its own in something like Twilio, or can actually be outsourced to Lambda on AWS to actually work. And it's just a function as a service. There's a whole bunch of infrastructure behind this that you don't have to deal with. All you had to do is write these few lines of code and send them. And that's a microservice. I mean, it's the literal definition of small, and it is a service. It does a thing. But of course, you can make them bigger than this. And that is, there's not much design to it. It's just as we need it. Let's pull things out into services. And whether or not it's a good practice, it's what we do. So that's way number one. Way number two is using something like bounded contexts and domain-driven design to help you determine how to split out your services. So bounded context, let's talk about that. A fancy phrase from the Blue Domain-Driven Design book. And what it means is that a word has a meaning. So customer, when I or you say customer, that could have different meanings in an e-commerce context. For instance, in a sales context, it means things like demographics. Demographic info could also mean things like, what ads does this person see when they come onto our site? It could also mean things like, what discounts can we give them? What discounts have they taken in the past? What have they ordered from us in the past? And what are they interested in right now? But all of these ways that we refer to a customer in a sales context have one unifying quality, and that is we want them to spend money on our site. Now, that's one context, sales context, but there are others, right? You can also have an order context, or you could have a customer service context. Now, the funny thing about these other contexts is that they are not interested in, and they do not care about the idea of the customer in the same way that you do for sales. In an order or a fulfillment context, you care about different things. You care about getting an order in and filling that order, shipping that order, logistics, right? And then maintaining inventory. So while you may interact with customers, when you interact with customers, you don't care about the ads. You really don't care about their demographics. You don't care what discounts they've had. You know what orders they have in the past. That's your domain. But you really don't care about their interests because that is not essential to an order fulfillment context. And so when you talk about a customer, you talk about, where do they live? How expensive is shipping? And in fact, you care about location as it relates to your logistics. You may care about things like value added tax or dealing with customs, but you don't think of the customer in the same way they think of in an order context. And so each of those things are bounded context. Inside of an order fulfillment context, I have different problems I'm trying to solve. Inside of a sales context, I'm trying to sell things, right? I think of a customer as a means to buy things. Inside of an order fulfillment context, a customer is only just one piece of it. Yeah, that's where the package is ultimately going. But I don't have the same concept or the same interaction with customers. And then finally, of course, you have the customer service context. And what's interesting about that is that the customer service context needs to interact with order fulfillment. It needs to interact with sales, but it also has a different view of the customer. It doesn't care about their interests. It doesn't care about ads we've shown them, but it does care about how many orders, how many returns, past communications. Are they a problem? Do we have analytics on them? Are they a serial returner? And also a way of identifying problem products. So when customer service deals with a customer, they see them in a completely different context, and they use a customer in a completely different way. Now imagine if you had these services weren't, separated, and you saw a customer, and you were like, "Hey, this is a giant monolith, and we have our e-commerce," and you saw a customer in your code base. Well, you've got one of three contexts that are all working together and also all combined but use different meanings. Fulfillment. But they're all jumbled together in one code base. In fact, I could accidentally be referring to, or on purpose being referred to, a customer in a different context in the same part of the code as another context. So I could be referring to a customer in a sales context inside my fulfillment code, or in a customer service context inside my fulfillment code, not even do it, or be doing it on purpose. And the problem there is that when I have multiple teams, or I have one team, they've got to figure out what context the code is referring to all the time. So when you split your code up from monoliths into services, one of the strategies, and one of the better strategies, I think, is to split it up by bounded context. There's a natural boundary there. The way that I talk about a customer is different in those contexts. So why not have my customer service context, my sales context, and my fulfillment context? And why not have them be separate services? Those services might interact directly to each other. They also might interact through a queue. Let's hope that looks like a queue. And they also might just interact through queues and through message buses without interacting directly with each other. So when you are determining how to split up your monolith or whether you want to, those are those are two ways. But I haven't really talked about the third way yet because the third way is more of an accident of Conway's law. And if you haven't heard of Conway's law, it is affecting you, even if you haven't heard of it. And it basically means that your architecture, or in this case, your topology, is going to reflect the lines of communication in your organization. So if you have one team, you're going to have one monolith. Yay! But if you have a team that handles the front end, a team that handles the back end, then you are probably going to have a front end or UI, and you're going to have your back end team with some logic and probably your database. And then these two might communicate. Like this could be an API, and this could be, your everybody's favorite language, JavaScript. But Conway's law says that however your organization communicates, whatever the lines of communication are, your architecture will mirror that. Now, this goes into the third way that we see microservices broken up or monoliths broken up into microservices, and that is the way the teams are structured. It's very common to have a front end team, an API team. It's very common to have a mobile app team, right? So you can imagine that all of a sudden your application is not broken up by the context. It's not broken up how it's used. No, no, no. It's broken up the way your organization is broken up. And maybe your mobile app talks to this API, and your front end talks to this API. And this API might be a fulfillments API. It could be vertically separated, or it could be horizontal. In other words, your API is your API. Inside of it, it has customer service. Inside of it, it has sales. And inside of it, it has fulfillment. And that's not so great, not from a maintenance perspective, because you find yourself having to duplicate behavioral logic across services, right? You end up making a change, customer service here, both your front ends have to make that change. Whereas if you made behavioral changes inside of a service that is all customer service, you don't have to make changes elsewhere. It's all encapsulated in here. It doesn't affect the others. They communicate through a queue or through shared contracts, but they don't have to make duplicated changes in order to have logic work. And that gets in that third way that we were talking about, which is what we call functionally. Function being mobile app, function being API, function being, front end. There we go. And that's the third way to split things up. Now, the reason why I said that sometimes there's verticality and horizontal split up in it is because when you think of things vertically, you think of a vertical slice of a feature. Well, what you're really thinking about is that I have some persistence data that lives in my database for this thing that I'm working on. I have some business logic for this thing that I'm working on. I might even have an API for this thing that I'm working on. And I have a UI for this thing that I'm working on. Now let's say that this is order fulfillment. So all of these four things live together. And in fact, and one of the few things that everybody agrees on with microservices is that they should have everything encapsulated in one place. This is a vertical slice. So this is order fulfillment. Wherever I'm going, I should be making the change in one place. I shouldn't have to change multiple deployables. That's vertical. Horizontal, as you can probably tell, is like, hey, all my business logic lives in one place, right? Or all of my HTTP APIs live in one place. API, not ABI, it's a different thing, although similar. Or all of my UIs live in one place. That's horizontal. But you can mix the two. And sometimes people, when they're dealing with services and they're dealing with Conway's Law being what it is, they have to mix the two. So you end up having, a UI and a front end for your order fulfillment, but you may only have a UI and an API for your order fulfillment, but you only have an API when it comes to customer service or it comes to sales. Because let's say you're using Salesforce on the other end. And what it all comes down to is the way that you split up your services depends on you. It depends on your company. And it depends on the structure of your teams. Because you're either going to have to change your teams to meet the structure of the microservices topology you want, or you're going to have to change your code to match your teams. And that's the closing thing I'll leave you with, is that the first step in deciding how you want to split up your monolith is deciding what do you want your teams to look like. Hey all, it's been fun. Let me know how you feel about this video and have a great day.